Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to review another baseless video by Simon Webbe. Let's start with a disclaimer first. I'm not doing this out of spite. I'm doing this in memory of my nan and my grandpa, who were both victims and survivors of Nazi regimes and made it to Britain. You have probably figured it out by now. There is this stand-up comedian on YouTube who has filled the shoes of Jeremy Kyle and taken over his cheap entertainment. He wants to carry on with this ping pong because I peeled his fragile ego off like a banana skin. He's now simping over it. Like Jeremy Kyle, he gets paid for being controversial, demeaning and insulting, but history-wise, today he's peddling lies again that Poland's trying to cancel its critics and hide the fact it ran concentration camps.
Poland operated a number of concentration camps where 20,000 Ukrainians starved to death, were murdered or died of diseases such as typhoid. It's an offence in Poland to talk of the concentration camps in Poland, about which I have made a few videos.
In reality, there were no concentration camps in Poland, ever. No matter how much you paint it. You can't polish a turd, but you can roll it in glitter. That's what Simon is doing. The simple fact is Poland's legal regulations are modeled on the laws of 16 other countries to make it possible to rectify this harmful Holocaust fallacy. Many Poles were killed as punishment for assisting Jews during the Second World War. This is why Poland had to prevent all attempts to accuse its people, contrary to the facts, of responsibility for the Holocaust or running concentration camps. This was a fight for the truth about the Second World War and the crimes committed against the Jews at that time. The whole world owes this truth both to the victims of the Second World War and to those who died as heroes to save other people. And so do I. I owe this to my grandparents. Why don't we start with little history first? At the beginning of the last century, Ukraine lost the revolution and civil war. Unfortunately, the Bolsheviks won. Their victory meant that Ukraine became part of the Soviet Union until its independence in 1991. After the loss, many Ukrainians wanted to align with the Bolsheviks and advocated a Soviet rule. The Great Famine and the Bolshevik purge of all Ukrainian communists and intellectuals crushed those helps and ended Ukrainian Sovietophilism. Bear with me and you will see my point. This led to decades of Soviet occupation and its propaganda. As a result, today you get a copy of that propaganda. Simon Webbe goes and artsy, which says the first concentration camp in which Ukrainians were incarcerated was the Austrian internment camp, where almost 7,000 Ukrainians accused of Russophilism were confined. Please note how the tone of this article changes whenever we talk of Austria. In Austria it's called internment camp, despite the same unhygienic conditions and contagious diseases which caused a large percentage of prisoners die. Then the article continues, a much greater number of Ukrainians were interned in Polish concentration camps. Sadly, the author never explains why he decides to call them concentration camps. They are no longer internment camps but concentration camps. The only change is location, Poland. You can argue that this is because of the articles he's quoting. Bear with me on this one. You may remember Simon Webbe's position. Simon basically tries to drive a wedge between the Western and Eastern Europe.
Everybody in Kiev knew what was happening. Why were murders such as this carried out quite openly by the Einsatzgruppen in Ukraine, but not in Holland, France, Belgium, Denmark or Italy?
If you watch over 1,000 of his xenophobic videos, you will easily understand why. You will also find him say things like which reinforce it.
I might mention here that I am not on Polish government's Christmas card list, and that they regularly contact me and try and menace me into taking down videos which I've made about Polish concentration camps.
He is basically insinuating something has been going on and he's uncovered it. Reality is, he's uncovered nothing. Bereza Kartuska is nothing new. It was an internment camp for Nazi collaborators caught out conspiring against Poland or collaborating with its enemies. It mattered not whether they were Ukrainian. The prisoners were Nazis, Ukrainian nationalists or Zionists conspiring against Poland. In other words, they were the enemies of the state. Simon says it was a concentration camp though. He says it's because it had barbed wires. Bloody me. Every internment camp had barbed wires. Every camp holding prisoners of war, except Soviet gulags, had barbed wires. Otherwise they would have all escaped. Am I really talking riddles? Would Simon Webb rather had them stay in 4-star hotels? Of course they had barbed wires and a tough discipline too. What they were not, however, is concentration camps. They may have been called that way before the war, but when the Nazis came they changed the name of the game forever. In his letter to Simon, Poland's ambassador Witold Sobkow says, "I am surprised at the implication of similarity between internment and detention centres for non-commissioned Polish officers in Scotland with Nazi German concentration camps. Making the connection with the emotionally charged term concentration camp, nowadays used almost exclusively in connotation with the Holocaust, to describe institutions of different origin, purpose, and mode of operation is misleading. By arbitrarily connecting events and ambiguous statements, Mr. Webb paints a contorted picture of British-Polish relations. He also corrupts the legacy of Poles who served during World War II. He is absolutely right. Still with me? Good. It's time to answer the question, why would someone call it a concentration camp if it was only internment camp? By now, you should all have heard of Germans' bestiality and human experiments in Nazi concentration camps in occupied Poland. You would have also heard of Buchenwald concentration camp, where guards and supervisors tortured and killed prisoners on the other side of the electric fence. Sometimes they would throw the inmates into the bear pit, because SS commander enjoyed watching the bears tear them to pieces. None of this ever happened in Poland. Why do you think a so-called historian like Simon Webb would never present any single video about it? Can you find a single video on Nazi concentration camps? He thinks he's uncovered something and he's sharing the secret with you. He thinks he's debunking history. Only yesterday I told you he would double down and call them Polish concentration camps. Today he is doing it with a smirk on his face. He is throwing mud at the wall to see what sticks. Well, let me take that smirk off his face then. What you're seeing is Simon Webb copying a smear campaign started by Soviets. Because Simon Webb is less than provisional in history, he doesn't even know that what he wants you to look at is only the work of Soviet propaganda. Take a look at biography he provides. This article relies solely on the work of Soviet propaganda pundits. Most of it comes from articles from Munich and Stuttgart, which were in Eastern Germany under Soviet control. Almost nothing of Western value. I note that Gulag Archipelago book is mentioned. It's a great book, but it's about gulags in Soviet Russia and proves nothing but a fact. The Soviet pundits operated around one formula, mixing historical events with lies. Poor Simon Webb, he thinks he is victorious, like a table tennis player who came to win Wimbledon tennis tournament. You got the wrong doors. Wrong championship, matey. This game is chess. It ain't no checkers. You think Poles imprisoned Ukrainians? Yeah, some of them have been actually. But majority of prisoners were Poles actually. Sorry matey. Between imprisoned communists, Hitlerites and Ukrainian ultranationalists, some would have been Ukrainians, but again, you keep thinking you know everything. Some people are so far behind in a race that they actually believe they're leading. About 43% of the prisoners were Poles, 33% were Jewish and only 17% were Ukrainians actually. The rest were minority of Belarusians and Germans. Regardless of nationality, they were all either collaborators or the enemies of the state. 55% of them were Polish communists who wanted a Soviet rule in Poland. Why did we never hear from you? You are a historian, aren't you? Oops. Bereza Kartuska was an internment camp only. It was set up right after the assassination Gabriel Narutowicz, the first president of Poland after regaining independence. The camp was set up to fight off the inevitable. It tried to fight off the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which was a non-aggression pact between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, a secret protocol that partitioned Central and Eastern Europe between them and split Poland up almost forever. Simon Webb, I'm sorry, but your dribble is only a copy and paste of Soviet propaganda. Even your own book about Poland's concentration camps in Butte, Scotland fails to recognize credible sources, instead supporting the allegations with rumors and propaganda from Pravda, the official newspaper and organ of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. It's little surprise that instead of talking history you're promoting conspiracy theories. It would be helpful if you were to do some proper research before you make your videos though. It gives me no pleasure to tell you are living in the world where you thought you've uncovered something. You thought you've discovered some little known facts and that you're cunningly talking of things, which many people prefer to see buried and forgotten about. Instead, you remind me of my 12-year-old. When he was about 6, he once came to the living room with his cheeks bright red. With great excitement he exclaimed he found gold. Then he showed us a handful of euro coins we had since the trip to Spain to visit my parents. That's all it was. A handful of euro coins. We didn't have a heart to tell him it was just coins, because he was very young. But you're not, Simon. You're an adult. Very silly adult indeed. This morning, I asked my wife over breakfast if she knew about Bereza Kartuzka. She was rushing off for a 7 a.m. start at hospital she works for. She is senior nurse there, so she was quite hecked off with my random question. Before I got my goodbye kiss, she said at the door, "Internment camp, why? Don't forget the shopping list I gave you." There you go, Simon. Even a random woman, born in Poland who only ever studied nursing in Surrey, knows about your secret. She knows it like everyone else does, and if she knows it then it's not a secret. Everyone knows about it. You're the only one who doesn't.